We read from the first chapter of John this morning. Jesus wanted to go to Galilee, and there he found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, son of Joseph." And then Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" And Philip said, "Come and see." Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him, and he said, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no deceit." And Nathanael said, "How do you know me?" Jesus said, "Before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you." And Nathanael answered him, saying, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God, the King of Israel." And Jesus said to him, "Because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, you believe? You will see greater things than these." He said to him, "Most assuredly I say to you, hereafter you shall see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man." This is the word from the Lord in the house of the Lord. Yeah. How big is God? I love that. Good lead in. Thank you. I appreciate you. Didn't know they were going to do that. How big is God? Is there a word to describe how big God is? I know I used to do confirmation classes with the kids back in Wisconsin. And the problem with trying to teach young people is they want absolute answers. And they would say, "Well, can God do this? Can God make a rock bigger than God can lift?" Anybody want to answer that one? And it was always, well, what if God, what was before God? They had all these questions that I had no answers for. But I was the teacher, so they didn't learn as much probably as they should have. But how big is God? God called Samuel at least 4 times before Samuel heard him. How many times has God called you? I had a feeling back when we had 4 little kids. Well, they weren't all little because they were a few years apart. But we had 4 kids, and it just seemed like maybe I ought to be doing something different than I was. And then we had kids off to college, and I felt like maybe I should be doing something different than what I'm doing. And then we got them all out of the house. No. And the company I worked for sold their product line and decided they did not need a sales force anymore. And that's when I went to my local pastor and said to him, "I got 5 months severance. I'm going to take 2 months and do anything you want me to do around the church. I will paint, I will fix, I will do anything you want done." And he said, "I want you to go to Sun Prairie and see the district superintendent." So I did. That's when I finally listened. And I could say, as Samuel did, "Here is your servant. Speak to me." The candidacy program to become a licensed local pastor in the United Methodist Church is designed to take 12 to 18 months because you have 12 sessions that you have to go through. And you have to coordinate it with a pastor who's full-time at a church somewhere. Except I was given the director of outdoor ministry, our camping director in the Wisconsin Conference, as my mentor. And he was in an office 32 miles away. And he was there every day. And I would go home with my unit, and I would figure out all the things I had to do, and I interview people, and I talk to people, and I would be back to see him the next week. So we got the candidacy program done in a few months. on 1st of January. No, that isn't right. Yeah, it is. I was declared a certified, not the first, but soon declared a certified candidate, which meant I can now preach. I don't know a thing. I'm as smart as a box of rocks, but I can preach. A lady pastor had her knee replaced, and I replaced her for 2 months. And then our pastor had a stroke. And so I took care of the services at our home church for a month, and then after a month he was able to come back and do one, and I did the other one because we had 2 services. And on June 1st, I was appointed to the 2 churches where I had replaced the lady. I replaced a lady who had been in a church position for 24 years. I can't imagine anyone ever preaching in one place for 24 years. On the 15th of February, I will have completed 24 years here. I can't imagine. I'm at least not like the pastor who every year asked to be moved. And so they would move him. And next time, after a year, he wanted to be moved. And finally, a church wanted to keep him another year, and he said, no, I got 50 sermons. Try doing 24 years of 50 sermons. Samuel was called 4 times by God before he listened and said to him, God, your servant is here. Speak to me. I hope, there's such joy, there's such a wonderful feeling when God calls you. And he doesn't call you to be here. He calls you to be there. He calls you to be in the pantry. He calls you to, I don't know what he calls you to do. But he will call and call and call until you listen. And that's the beauty of it. Nathanael said, Jesus from Nazareth, what good thing could come out of Nazareth? I mean, it was a hokey little town. It'd be like us saying, what good thing can come out of Oatman? I mean, would you expect something wonderful to come from Oatman? They're even rounding up the burros and moving them out, right? How big is God? I hadn't planned on using that quite this often, but how can he find us here in this place? How could he make things happen? We live here because we had timeshare in Vegas from 81 on, and we tried to come and use it one year during the Consumer Electronics Show. No rooms available anywhere around there. So my wife said, let's go down to Havasu and we'll see the bridge. And there was a sign over here on the highway that said, Country Club Living on a championship golf course. And she said, turn here, we're going to look at that. Do you see a driving force in this life of mine? And here we are. Paul wrote to the church in Corinth and said, I can do anything, but not everything is good. We can do anything because God gave us the power to decide. What he forgot to do was give us an extra helping of listening. Because he calls us over and over. He calls us when we come here. He calls us at home. He calls us whenever we face a situation. And so often, his response to our call, to our response to his call, is to say, listen, I'll talk to you later. He didn't pick Samuel up and say, now you're going to do this and this and this. He said, he called him until Samuel could say, I am your servant. Tell me what you want. Our problem is we have decided that since we have free will and since we can make decisions, that we can make good decisions all the time. The fellow in business who said to his boss, he said, how do you get ahead in business? And he said, you got to have experience. Okay. He said, how do you really get ahead? And he said, you make good decisions. And he said, how do you learn to make good decisions? He said, you make bad decisions long enough, and then you'll make good decisions. Experience is what counts. So, everything that God desires for us is beneficial. Everything God desires for us is beneficial. We face sickness, illness, we face economic crises in our lives, we face weather, we face travel problems, we face listening to political pundits drive us nuts. We listen. But our problem is making decisions based on what we hear, sometimes not what we know. God will speak to us as he spoke to Samuel. He will call us to be servants if we can listen. And listening's difficult. Listening's very hard. So a friend of mine has a sweatshirt that says 90% of married life is shouting, "What?" from the other room. Some of these things, they used to be a lot funnier before I became an old married person. How big is God? God is big enough to love each and every one of us just like we are. God is big enough to want us to be different. God is big enough to love us just as we are. But his love should make us want to be better than we are. Paul said, I can do anything, but not everything is good for me. And they got very specific. Talked about a prostitute, but what he's really talking about in that phrase is that anything that we choose to marry ourselves to that is not good will cause us harm. He used the example of a prostitute, but any fetish, any habit, anything like that of a detrimental kind will cause us harm. And we become part of what our fetish is. We become part of what our desire is. And his desire is to love. Randy Block service yesterday was about a 51-year-old man, who recently adopted 4 small children. He had himself been adopted. They fostered 4 children and adopted them. And after a tough battle with cancer, he passed. But his family and friends rallied around, and they will give good support to that family, great support to that family, because they've been called by God. And they were a pretty rough-looking bunch. You guys dress a lot better than they did. But they were called to be servants. Just as everybody, every time you're called to step up beside someone with a problem, a situation, you are called by God to be a servant. And there's no greater call, there's no greater thing in life than to be a servant. Not that you have to sign up for anything or of that sort. You just need to hear when God calls. And be willing, when the situation presents itself in front of you, to say, here I am. Your servant listens. And we listen to a God who is so big that he loves each and every one of us just as we are. But like a good father, like a good parent, he wants us all a little better than we have been, a little better than we were. But it doesn't stop his love, ever. What good thing can come out of Oatman? What good thing can come out of Nazareth? God comes from everywhere. He lives everywhere. We have to be willing to accept that wherever there is a need that we can fill is where God lives. Where there is a need that we can assuage, that's where God lives. Because he needs to live here so that we can be all that he would have us to be. I listened to his voice, I guess, and ignored him as Samuel did. 3 times or 10 times, I don't know. But he does get your attention after a while. And he's called you each to do something, somewhere, somehow, with someone. There is no time that we are free from the duty to be a servant. And we don't know who we serve. He said, though, if you do it to the least of mine, you do it to me. So if you call on someone who's sick, if you call on someone who's not able to do things for themselves and you do a little favor, what a miracle it is that God puts you in the right place to touch that life that way. That's when he's talking to you. That's when he's calling. Not in the middle of the night when he calls you out of a sleep, but every time you face a situation where you can make a difference, God's calling. Listen. Listen. Amen.